Hi everyone, Samir Samit here, and welcome back to our F1 podcast.
Today we'll be talking about the 2023 Azerbaijan Grand Prix.
And finally, after 4 weeks of doing absolutely nothing, F1 returned.
I know, 4 weeks is crazy, but I think the reason is that they had the Chinese Grand Prix originally in between the Australia and Baku, but then it got cancelled, so they never replaced it, and so we ended up with this now, a huge 4 week break.
Yeah, but anyway, moving on into Baku this weekend, the big news was that, well, first of all, there was a new format, but second of all, it was announced that Franz Tost, the team principal of AlphaTauri, would be stepping down at the end of this year, I think. And so he would no longer be AlphaTauri's team principal. Obviously, he's had his fair issues this season so far with the team. The car has just not been up to his standard ever since 2021, where they had that really good year, especially with Pierre Gasly.
Yeah.
The car has just been slowly falling off, and I think he's decided that this is a time to leave.
Yeah, it's obviously a real shame because he was a really good leader, nurturing a lot of really talented Red Bull Academy drivers. Like obviously he nurtured Max Verstappen and Pierre Gasly. So it was a really sad announcement to see, and we wish him all the best in the future.
Yeah, also other drivers include Daniel Ricciardo and Sebastian Vettel too that he's helped nurture. So he's just been like a really key role in not just the AlphaTauri and Toro Rosso, but also the Red Bull family in general too. So
Yep. And the other major announcement for this weekend was that there would be a new sprint format in F1 for Baku. And even before this new format, a lot of the teams were really concerned as to why there was a sprint in Baku, a track already known for having lots of crashes, and just a crash in a sprint race would just ruin the actual race for a lot of teams. And so they were really concerned about that. So what the FIA did was they introduced a new sprint shootout for this weekend. And so the format would be on Friday, you'd have just one practice session, FP1, and then you would go into a standard qualifying session that would set the grid for Sunday's race. And so similar to a regular sprint Friday, except this qualifying actually determines Sunday's race grid. And then Saturday, there was another shortened but still standardized qualifying format, but this would set the grid for the sprint race, which happened after this sprint shootout. So the sprint shootout was a shortened qualifying session, and in this sprint was the regular sprint race that happened on Saturday. And then so effectively that was just an entire separate race in its whole. And then Sunday was the race itself.
Yeah, me personally, I don't really like this new format because the fact that neither the qualifying or the sprint race affects the actual Sunday Grand Prix, it just makes this whole thing just pointless. Like, teams could throw away their weekend accidentally for nothing. And so yes, you get points from the sprint, but there's no real entertainment from this because it doesn't affect their starting on the main Grand Prix. So I don't really like this because it just makes the whole thing kind of useless.
I agree with that, but at the same time too, it does give drivers and teams another race-like simulation before the actual race. And so it gives drivers also more practice, which is never bad, but I think the FIA could have done this at a safer track rather than Azerbaijan.
Yeah, but from a fan's perspective, we want to see those driver mistakes. We want to see those teams not knowing what to do. We want to see all of that because that's part of the drama that comes with F1. But from a teams and drivers perspective, yes, it is more safer and it is like a lot better practice. But I think from the fan side, we want to see all of those things.
Yeah, I agree with that. So anyway, going into FP1 now, the one practice session for this weekend. So this would be a crucial practice session, and immediately we already saw Max Verstappen blitzing the field already, but actually we saw Charles Leclerc pretty close with him at the end. He was just 300ths off Verstappen, and Leclerc, as we know, really good around Baku, pole sitter in 2021 and 2022, so he would be looking to keep up the form this year.
Yeah, also 2019 he came pretty close before he threw it all away after crashing into the wall, but in FP1 too, we also saw an issue with the Alpine immediately of Pierre Gasly. His engineer told him to pull over because he had an issue, and then moments later we saw fire coming out of the back of the Alpine. And Gasly then, as soon as he parked, he had so much smoke coming out of the Alpine, and they had to pour so much of the fire extinguisher into his car just to put the fire out. So not at all what Alpine need.
Yeah, I saw that. It was just smoke like pouring out of the air box of his Alpine car, and then they had to just dump like so much fire extinguisher on that. It was really not what Alpine needed, especially Gasly too. And this weekend again, one practice session is all the drivers are getting. So if it's car reliability, that's valuable time gone for the drivers and team.
Yeah, also then after that we saw Kevin Magnussen have a moment at turn one where he kind of hopped the entry curb into turn one, and then that threw his car off balance, so he was nearly into the wall if it weren't for his good reactions and reflexes, and he was able to divert his car onto the escape road. Yeah, but that could have been really bad.
But the reason that happened was because he lost power, and so loss of power midway through the corner would always be really scary, and he did a good job saving it. But because that happened at a similar time to Gasly's incident, they had to bring out a red flag for that.
Oh, yeah. Obviously, yeah. But also another moment we saw with Carlos Sainz too is when he brushed the wall, and luckily he got away with what could have been some serious suspension damage. It was the entry before the castle, kind of that left-right chicane before the castle. He clipped the wall there, and he got really lucky, I think, because that could have been really bad.
Yep, and we would see that more throughout the weekend. I mean, it was pretty tight corner. It starts off, you can kind of see it, but then it becomes blindish until you get to the right-hander. So you always try to get as close to the wall as you can, but sometimes drivers do overstep that.
Yeah, we've been seeing a theme so far here in FP1, just a lot of driver errors, and that continued with Yuki Tsunoda at turn 3 when when he entered the corner. Then it looked all fine, but then he suddenly lost the rear end of his AlphaTauri, and then he clipped his rear right tire on the wall, and that caused a puncture, and that just caused him to have a full 180-degree spin. But that was a really bad puncture for him because he had the whole rest of the lap to complete, and that would also be damaging the floor, especially if the tire just like it starts degrading more and it starts flinging debris everywhere. That can damage your floor. It can damage the wheel rim as well, so you have to be really careful when coming into the pits.
We saw something like that happen like to Charles Leclerc in Monaco in 2019 when he tried to go for a dive bomb. I think it was against Nico Hülkenberg at Rascasse, and he hit the wall and he got a puncture, but instead of coming back slowly, he was pretty frustrated, and so he came back really fast and really aggressively, and that completely shredded his wheel rim and shredded his floor, and so it completed what was a pretty miserable weekend for him actually there. But just to show how delicate you have to be when the tire is just ripping to shreds, because otherwise you're gonna rip a lot more.
Yeah. Also then moving on to the next, the Mercedes too, they were looking pretty good here, much better than 12 months ago this time last year with all the porpoising that was happening. And I think all of us remember Lewis Hamilton getting out of his car and just grasping his back because of how much he was in pain due to all the porpoising. So they're definitely in much better shape. And Lewis Hamilton definitely looked on it through the castle section too, especially with his teammate George Russell. Both of them were looking really good, definitely not a lot of issues, so definitely in a much better position than here last year.
Yeah, but no one could really catch the Red Bulls and Ferraris. It was Verstappen first, and then Leclerc second, and Perez came third, and they were all within a tenth and a half of each other, so it was really good. And then lagging a bit behind was Carlos Sainz, but still fourth. And then came fifth and sixth, Lando Norris in the McLaren and Nick de Vries in the AlphaTauri. So they were showing some good pace too, but again, it could just be a different race program they were running, because there's so much the teams would have wanted to get done in this one practice session that you probably really need more. You probably need at least 2 sessions for all the things that teams and drivers want to get done.
Yeah, definitely.
And then 7th was Lance Stroll, and 8th Fernando Alonso. So both Aston Martins in the top 10, but still not quite where we thought we would see them after their successive runs in the first 3 rounds of the season. And then 9th came Albon in the Williams and Zhou Guanyu in the Alfa Romeo in 10th.
Yeah, so now moving on into FP2, then, well, actually, there was no FP2. Immediately went to the sprint shootout now, and the effective qualifying that would be to set the grid for the sprint race.
No, this was the actual qualifying for the race. It happened after FP1. The regular qualifying happens for the actual race, and so at the start we saw Gasly first of all in the pit lane. He was thanking the mechanics for fixing his car.
Yeah,
After that nasty like moment in FP1 where his whole car just caught flames, and then right out after the bat in Q1, we saw Nick DeFries put it into the wall at turn
yeah.
3, and he went in quite deep. And so, again, DeFries making a lot of mistakes so far, as we've seen before, and that's really putting him on a lot of pressure already because he really got his Alpine or Alpha Tauri seat because of how well he did in
Monza.
Monza for Williams, but
Yeah.
also because AlphaTauri couldn't get another driver that they wanted. They would have wanted to get Colton Herta, an IndyCar star, but they couldn't get him a super license. So they saw how good De Vries was, and they picked up De Vries. But if they keep if he keeps making mistakes like this, then his seat could really be at risk of getting taken by someone else.
Yeah, and De Vries is a really talented driver. He's the 2019 Formula 2 champion and the Formula E World Champion too.
Yeah.
So I don't know why he's struggling so much in F1 because yes, Formula E is different, but he has that junior Formula experience too. So I don't know why he's struggling. Maybe it's the car, but he and Logan Sargent are so far the only drivers that have not scored any points. So that's going to be really a challenge for someone like Nick DeFries because his seat I think is more at risk than Logan Sargent's
Yeah,
so far.
I think so too. And then just 3 minutes after Nick DeFries' accident, we had another accident also at turn 3. It was once again Pierre Gasly. So
Yeah,
Alpine, after just fixing his car, would have to refix it, would have to repair it again. And this time though, Gasly didn't go into the wall. He made the corner but just lost it on the exit, and so his rear right and his rear wing hit that exit wall, and so that brought his Alpine to a halt and brought out a red flag and another red flag, and so that was not exactly what Alpine would have
yeah.
wanted, especially thinking they came into this weekend thinking they would be pretty strong, but with these mistakes that wouldn't be the case.
Yeah, the whole like rear, the right rear of his car, almost all of it was like shattered due to the heavy contact that he took. But so the mechanics would have a really big repair job ahead of him to get his car fixed. But after that, we saw the Australian driver Oscar Piastri in the McLaren get his way into Q2, and that put Logan Sargent at risk. But then the next one to come across the line was Fernando Alonso, who is currently in 11th, but then he crossed the line to take 7th place and get into Q2 as well. And after that too, we saw Albon improve his time. We saw Sonoda improve his time, and we also saw Logan Sargent jump all the way up to P9 from where he was, being the driver at risk to P9, so he could get into Q2.
Yep, and also in that sequence we saw Magnussen, who was 18th. We saw him trying to improve his time, and then all of a
Yeah.
sudden his engineer came on the radio. He was like, "Okay, Kevin, we have an issue. Slow down and box this lap." And so Kevin was like, "No, it feels fine." And then they were like, "No, we can't risk it." And so again, just disappointment for Kevin Magnussen here.
Yeah.
And a lot of teams have been struggling with reliability here. So just another reliability issue that came at the cost of Q2 for Kevin Magnussen.
Yeah, so after all of that, then there were still more drivers improving. His teammate, Nico Hulkenberg, improved, but barely, just to P14th, with lots of drivers like the two Alfa Romeos and Oscar Piastri improving behind. Joe got up to improve, Bottas got up to improve, also Oscar Piastri got up to improve. So that was both Haas cars out of Q1. And so the bottom five that were eliminated were Nick DeFries, Pierre Gasly, Kevin Magnussen, Nico Hulkenberg, and Zhou Guanyu. So those were the five that were out of Q1.
Yeah,
So for the first time, I think in his career, Logan Sargent made it into Q2.
that was really impressive. But
Yeah,
also, I think he got a bit lucky with the fact that there were two crashes from,
yeah,
especially Gasly, who looked pretty strong, and then I think De Vries could have gone into Q2.
yeah. But moving on into Q2, then towards the after the first set of runs, it was Leclerc actually who was looking the quickest ahead of Perez. So Verstappen was all the way down in third, and then Alonso was behind him, and then Sainz was in fifth. But obviously Max Verstappen then on the next set of runs he improved his pace a lot. Purple first sector, purple second sector, as we saw Ocon cross the line first, and he was only in P10, so he was momentarily through to Q3, but just barely. This was before Max Verstappen had even crossed the line to improve his time. Norris went up to P5, and then Max Verstappen with purple sector 1 and purple sector 2 improved his time by 2/10 clear of Charles Leclerc. So that was a mighty lap from Max Verstappen on the soft compound of tires too as well. So that was really impressive from him. Bottas could not cross the line to improve his time as well. So that was it for him.
Yeah, and then we saw Piastri improve, and then Tsunoda too. And Tsunoda improving knocked George Russell out. So it was a really big shock to see George Russell out, but he wasn't happy with the way his car was handling. So it was just another disappointing thing for George Russell. But they would still have the sprint shootout and the sprint race to improve the his car for the actual race on Sunday.
Yeah, so the bottom five that were eliminated from this were Logan Sargent, who just could not improve his time, Valtteri Bottas, Alex Albon, Esteban Ocon, and George Russell. Surprisingly, George Russell, by 4/1000ths of a second, was out of Q2, and for the first time this season, he has failed to out-qualify his teammate. So that was a big disappointment for George Russell.
Yep, so now going into Q3, we saw Perez first one to cross the line, and Perez went provisionally pole, and then Verstappen went fastest, and then Sainz he could only manage third, and then we saw Leclerc sprint to the line, and Leclerc actually took second, but upon further investigation, we saw that he had set the exact same time down to the 3 decimals as Max Verstappen, and in F1 we use 3 decimals now, and so it was identical lap times essentially with 3 decimals for Charles Leclerc and Verstappen. But because Verstappen set his lap time first, he kept P1 and Leclerc kept P2. So we would go down to the second runs to see who would take pole.
Yeah, and Alonso also could not get his car as further up the grid as he wanted to. He was only P8 behind Tsunoda and Norris and Hamilton too. It's not the pace that we've seen from the Aston Martin so far this weekend.
Yeah, I thought Alonso surely would have a bit more pace in the Aston Martin, but it looks like the Ferraris just turned up here and were ready to challenge the Red Bulls, at least in qualifying for now.
Yeah, so moving on to the last set of rounds then for this qualifying shootout, immediately we saw Charles Leclerc blitz the first sector. Carlos Sainz was 2/10ths down, so he was not improving and he looked like he was not going to improve. But then Sergio Perez went even quicker than Charles Leclerc too, so it looked like Sergio Perez was in contention for pole position too. And towards the middle sector of the lap, Leclerc then with a purple middle sector and now 2/10ths up on Max Verstappen's previous time. Sainz was just losing even more time as he was now 6/10ths back on Leclerc's pace and Verstappen's pace. Perez was only 6/100ths behind Charles Leclerc and 6/100ths up behind on Max Verstappen too. So he was still very much in contention. But as Charles Leclerc crossed the line, he went 2/10ths quicker than Max Verstappen and took provisional pole. Carlos Sainz could not improve his time. He finished 1 second behind Charles Leclerc. So,
really surprising.
Yeah, especially it's the same car too. But Sergio Perez, at the end, he could not improve his time. He was 2/10ths back on Charles Leclerc. Max Verstappen then could not improve his time either. And Fernando Alonso, as he crossed the line, jumped up all the way into P6. So that was a really good qualifying from Charles Leclerc now, who made it 3 pole positions in a row in Azerbaijan.
This man is really quick on a flying lap around Azerbaijan. I mean, unbelievable. 3 years in a row, and you could argue that, especially this year and 2021, pretty mediocre cars too. So it just shows how much he likes Baku.
Yeah. So now, the top 10 for the qualifying, for the main Grand Prix was Charles Leclerc in pole position, Max Verstappen second, Sergio Perez third, Carlos Sainz fourth, Hamilton fifth, Alonso sixth, Norris seventh, Tsunoda eighth, Stroll ninth, and Oscar Piastri in P10. That was a really good qualifying once again from Oscar Piastri, the rookie, who got his McLaren up into Q3. I think Oscar Piastri has been doing a really good job so far this season. Of course, in round one, we all thought the McLaren was really bad, but now look at them, both cars in Q3.
Yeah. Well, that's been a great improvement for the Papaya team.
Yeah. So now moving on into the sprint shootout. Now this is a sprint shootout and the qualifying session that would set the grid for the sprint race later on that day. So going into SQ1 then, it was so far different track conditions than at qualifying last time because this was daylight, whereas last time it was so far during the sunset. So first of all, we saw Zhou Guanyu cross the line to become the driver at risk, and then later on we saw Max Verstappen take P1 too and get ahead of Charles Leclerc up at the top, but still lost all sorts of drivers still waiting to complete their laps to try to get out of SQ1. And one of them was Carlos Sainz too, trying to improve his time. As he crossed the line though, he went up to P4, but still 8 tenths down on his teammate. So something with Sainz this weekend is not sitting well with him.
He's been lagging behind this whole weekend, and so we were anxious to see whether that would carry into the races.
Yeah, but I think you'll get that fixed out. But we also saw then Logan Sargent and Alex Albon, both Williams were up there in 7th and 8th too, so that was really good from them. But still, the track was improving, the drivers were improving. We immediately saw Norris go up into P9, and then Albon, as he came through one of the penultimate turns, he aced that, but then there was a Red Bull on his left. But then that wasn't the big news. The big news came right behind it when we saw the Williams of Logan Sargent hit the wall after towards the entry of the corner. He saw both Ferraris there. He was saying it was not saying it was their fault. He said, well, I guess he was kind of saying it was their fault. He said that they were in the middle of the road.
Yeah, he just got distracted by it. Obviously, as a rookie, he's still learning on how to like tone away the other distractions, like the other cars on track. But even for any driver, that still has a negative effect. If you see a car where you don't expect it, that's obviously really scary. And so Sargent just went a bit too deep, and he just hit the wall on the exit with his right rear tire. Similar way to how Gasly crashed in FP1, but this was at a different corner, and so that would completely wreck Sargent's qualifying.
Yeah, it also brought out the red flag, but Sargent, he did make it into SQ2, but he completely wrecked his car, so the Williams crew had a really big repair job to do after this. So the people then that were eliminated because the session could not be restarted with just 30 seconds left, the bottom 5 that were eliminated were Nick De Vries, Pierre Gasly, Yuki Tsunoda, Valtteri Bottas, and Zhou Guanyu. So both AlphaTauris and both Alfa Romeos, and Pierre Gasly once again having a wretched start to the weekend. All 5 of them were out.
Yeah, I mean, especially for Alfa Romeo, that is really hugely disappointing for them because they obviously had a lot more pace to be in the upper end of Q2, probably even Q3, but they couldn't get it done because of Sargent's crash.
Yeah, so now moving on to SQ2, then a lot of action for those drivers as well. In the bottom 5 now, Sargent, he would obviously not be able to set a time because his car was totaled, so that left 4 spots now for drivers to try to get out of SQ2 and make it into SQ3. Albon was looking good now as the checkered flag waved, as he was sat in P7, but still with lots of people behind to improve. Stroll now went up to P7, knocking Albon back to 8th, and that also knocked Oscar Piastri out. Lando Norris made it too into SQ3, but the 5 that were eliminated from SQ2 were Logan Sargent, Kevin Magnussen, Esteban Ocon, Nico Hülkenberg, and Oscar Piastri.
Yeah, we saw Stroll knock out Oscar Piastri, and that was really good play. Really good teamwork by the Aston Martin team because Stroll got a huge slipstream from behind Fernando Alonso as Alonso was boxing, and so that catapulted Stroll into the top 10 at the expense of Piastri.
We've seen Alonso and Stroll have a really good relationship so far this season. It's really good to see them. It's like Alonso is actually settling really nicely into this team, and Stroll is also just like Alonso really respects Stroll. We also heard him say that Stroll is a future world champion too. So they really do respect each other, and it's really nice to see for once Alonso not having any beef with his teammate.
Yeah, that's really nice, especially last year. Oh my God.
Yeah, last year it was like clear that he wanted to leave really badly. His relationship with Esteban Ocon was not really good, so it's really refreshing to see Alonso have a good relationship with a teammate for once. So now moving on to the final part of SQ of this sprint shootout in SQ3, Max Verstappen and Sergio Perez were looking pretty level after the first set of runs. It was Perez who was crossed the line first, and he went to P1 obviously because he was the first one to set a time. But Max Verstappen, when he crossed the line, he could not beat Sergio Perez. So at the moment it was Perez ahead of Verstappen. Hamilton also could not beat any of the Red Bulls, but that's kind of expected too. But the two Aston Martins could not beat the Williams of Alex Albon. So once again, Alex Albon just driving the wheels off of that Williams and making it as fast as possible.
It's a bit like what George Russell did with the Williams in
Yeah.
2021, except now it's Alex Albon in 2023. And so Leclerc we saw take provisional pole, and Sainz couldn't really do anything about that. Sainz only went up to P4. And so going into the final runs on SQ and SQ3, we saw Verstappen and Perez trying to improve, and then a yellow flag came out in sector 1, and at turn 3 we saw Charles Leclerc in the wall, sort of like what happened in 2021. I think he crashed here, and
2019 he crashed here when he went into the wall.
Yeah, and so it was again Leclerc trying to do, I guess, what happened in Monaco 2021 as well, where he took pole under his own crash, but that wouldn't stop Perez from hindering his lap, because Perez was way already in sector 3 by the time Leclerc crashed. But even without Leclerc's hindrance, Perez could not improve his time. Hamilton could not improve either. He stayed 5th. And also Fernando Alonso, who only stayed 8th in his Aston Martin. Really surprising. And again,
Stroll beat him to 8th too. It was Stroll who finished in 8th, and then then Alonso was able to set his time, and then he went quicker than Stroll too. So immediately at first, before the red in case of a red flag, then Stroll would have been ahead of Alonso, but luckily Alonso got his lap in.
Yeah, and so Verstappen also couldn't improve his time, so it left Leclerc again with 2 poles in a row here this weekend, one for the actual race and one for the sprint race. So really well done to Leclerc, and I think he would fix that issue of what he knows how he crashed, so he would fix that and take that into the race later on.
Yeah, Max Verstappen could also not beat Sergio Perez or Charles Leclerc, so he would line up in 3rd. And so the order for the grid then was Charles Leclerc would start on pole for the sprint, Perez would be in 2nd, Verstappen 3rd, Russell 4th, Sainz 5th, Hamilton 6th, Albon in 7th, Alonso 8th, Stroll 9th, and then Lando Norris in P10 for McLaren. So now moving on into the sprint race. Before the sprint race started, Williams confirmed that Logan Sargent would not be able to start the race because of all the damage that he did during the sprint shootout. So Logan Sargent would not be able to start the sprint.
And that must have been a lot of damage, because we know how fast these F1 pit crews can work.
Yeah.
And to fix all the cars really quickly. And so to see that even with how fast they go and that short amount of time, just the extent of damage, I think Williams decided it would be safer to just not take any risks and send Sargent out, just to keep him in the garage and get his car in prime condition for the race on Sunday.
Yeah, so moving on to the start of the sprint then, at lights out, it was a really good reaction time from Sergio Perez, who I thought initially would get the jump on Leclerc, but Leclerc just starting that a bit earlier and ahead of Leclerc, he was able to lead into turn 1, and Russell and Verstappen got really close together as they were side by side through the first couple of corners. Russell also sent one to the inside at turn 2, and this is where Verstappen and Russell clipped each other. But on the run towards turn 3 was Leclerc from Perez, and then Russell was edging ahead of Max Verstappen, and he had the inside line too, so it looked like he was going to get the position too from Max Verstappen. But into turn 3, Verstappen was squeezed by George Russell, and then now he was being challenged by the other Ferrari of Carlos Sainz. But that contact from George Russell and Max Verstappen at turn 2 left a hole in Max Verstappen's side pod, and that would play a key effect in him not being able to overtake anyone for the rest of the sprint.
Yeah, because obviously the side pods help direct air around the car, and so with a hole in it, the air is not going around it, it's going actually into the car, and it's slowing down the car. So even a small hole will have a huge effect on these F1 cars because of how the way they're uniquely and critically designed to maximize everything when it comes to aerodynamic performance.
Yeah, so as lap one ended, then we saw a yellow flag in sector two, and we also then saw a tire start rolling down the hill because it was the AlphaTauri of Yuki Tsunoda, I think it was, who had an issue, and he broke his front wing earlier on in the lap, and then as he was trying to make one of those really fast left turns, he just did not have the downforce to turn, so he hit the wall, and that broke his rear right tire, and that got dislodged off of his car, and that started rolling down the hill too. I think it was pretty funny to see, but that was causing a lot of damage to the tire rim.
Yeah, I got confused because I originally didn't see the wing damage, so I was like, how did that happen? That's a flat
Yeah,
out corner. It just looked like he turned the steering wheel as much as he could, but the car didn't turn. And so
yeah.
now I found out that it was front wing damage, and that would explain a lot because it was really highly unusual.
Yeah, and there was also then a lot of debris too scattered around the track, so that brought out the safety car too. And so then a lot of people made their pit stops. Well, not a lot of people. Some of the people made their pit stops, including an Alpine of Esteban Ocon. He pit for soft compound of tires to try to give him that competitive advantage towards the restart. And but Max Verstappen was on the radio as well during the safety car, asking if he had any damage, and he was complaining a lot about Russell, asking why he was taking such unnecessary risks on lap one. But obviously, it's two different drivers with two different goals right now at this stage of the season. So
And I don't think Verstappen can really be complaining about Russell considering that used to be what Verstappen did
yeah,
back when
Verstappen
we
is also
saw.
known for these type of things.
Yeah, especially when Verstappen back then when he was teammates with Daniel Ricciardo, we saw how Verstappen's sometimes immaturity when it came to wheel-to-wheel racing would lead to tanglements, and we would see often compare him to Ricciardo and see how Ricciardo was a lot better with his overtakes because he respected a lot of the drivers more. And so Verstappen has learned obviously over time, and he gives people a lot more space, but I don't think Verstappen can be complaining about what Russell did considering he used
Yeah.
to do that.
Yeah, so now moving on to the restart, then at lap 5, it took that long for the restart. It was Leclerc who was leading from Sergio Perez too, and immediately we saw Verstappen putting pressure on George Russell, and Verstappen had the inside line, and he was able to easily pass George Russell, and we also saw Carlos Sainz get past Lewis Hamilton, and then Alonso dived to the inside of Lewis Hamilton, so it was an opportunistic move from Fernando Alonso, and he was just following his fellow countryman Carlos Sainz through, now trying to stay ahead of Lewis Hamilton. So then the order was Charles Leclerc from Sergio Perez, Verstappen, Russell, Sainz, Alonso, Hamilton, and Albon was still right there, hanging back in 8th place too. So he could maybe pick up some points too with all of this damage happening up in front.
Yeah, and then going further into the race, we saw the two McLarens were close to each other, and we saw Oscar Piastri actually pass Lando Norris. So Piastri has been performing really well compared to Lando Norris this season. I think Norris has said that Piastri is giving him more of a challenge than Ricardo did, but Piastri really showing that he's giving Norris a big fight through the season, and here he overtook Norris not through team orders, but just because he was so much faster. So I think that might start to worry Norris a little bit, especially him being the team leader and everything.
Yeah, speaking of so much faster, right before this on lap 8, we saw Sergio Perez breeze past Charles Leclerc towards turn 1. So Sergio Perez took the lead of the sprint race here in Azerbaijan on a track that he's won at before. And then we saw the two McLaren swapping positions because of Piastri's really good pace. But then after that, on lap 12, we saw Lance Stroll finally get past Alexander Albon, while Valtteri Bottas on the radio was complaining about the tires starting to go away, and Bottas was on the soft tires too, so it was kind of expected that his tires were going to fade off this quickly.
Yeah, but one thing the teams noticed through Baku this weekend was that on the long runs too, the tires would just start to melt,
Yeah.
and so that proposed questions about whether this would be a two-stop race or a one-stop, and I
Yeah.
think the teams determined it would be a two-stop because just how bad the tires would be at the end of their life cycle.
Yeah, we also saw then the Alfa Romeo of Zhou Guanyu get past Nico Hulkenberg and move himself up into another position. But on lap 14 then, we saw a really nice overtake from the AlphaTauri of Nick de Vries to get past Valtteri Bottas into turn 1 and then chase on after Nico Hulkenberg. But then that brought us towards the end of the race then, where Sergio Perez, he kind of dominated this race after he
Yeah.
got past Leclerc, and he won the sprint race in Azerbaijan and took the sprint race win ahead of Charles Leclerc, who just held off Max Verstappen, to be fair. So Leclerc kind of took his first podium of the year. So then Max Verstappen finished in third ahead of George Russell then in fourth. But it was a really good day for Sergio Perez after showing he has some really good pace. So if I was Max Verstappen, I would be really worried for tomorrow's race.
Yep. So Russell finished fourth, and then Sainz fifth. Then came Alonso sixth, and Hamilton seventh. Then Stroll in his Aston Martin eighth. Then Alex Albon ninth in the Williams, and Oscar Piastri 10th in his McLaren.
Yeah.
And this was a Perez sort of effectively became like the first repeat winner of a race here in
Kind
Baku,
of, yeah.
but kind of not really though, because it was a sprint race. So he would look to become the first repeat winner, but again, because of his great performance in the actual qualifying on Friday, Leclerc would still start on pole, so
Yep.
he would have the upper hand on Perez.
Yeah, so now moving on into that race then, at lights out, this time it was Leclerc and Verstappen on the front row. So Leclerc got a good start, Verstappen also got a good start, but Leclerc once again just maintained the lead into turn one. So it was, and this time there was not a lot of trouble as it was during the sprint. So it was Leclerc ahead of Verstappen, then Perez, and then Hamilton and Alonso were getting close together, but just ahead of them was Carlos Sainz. But Hamilton was still able to keep ahead of Fernando Alonso, but Stroll was now looking to challenge Lando Norris as he was getting the slipstream from his teammate. So that was a nice, good teamwork again from the two Aston Martins to try to advance themselves.
Yeah, and so there were really close battles going on to the first lap, but then we go on to lap four, and after following for multiple laps, we saw Max Verstappen finally overtake Charles Leclerc.
Yeah.
And so this would we all expected this considering how fast the Red Bulls were in their race pace, and so Leclerc could do nothing to defend the inevitable from Verstappen just breezing past. And one major reason for that was because of Red Bull's double DRS. Sort of, they've engineered their car in a way that the when they have DRS open, it not only helps their airflow through the top of the car, but it helps their airflow through the bottom through their diffuser.
Yeah.
And so I think when Verstappen overtook Leclerc, he was almost 30 kph faster
Wow.
than Leclerc. And
Yeah.
so that's absolutely incredible.
Adrian Newey doing it again.
Yeah, I mean, unbelievable how quick that Red Bull is compared to Leclerc. It just absolutely hunted him down the straight and just breezed past.
Yeah, and also now moving on to lap 6, we saw the other Red Bull of Sergio Perez breeze past Charles Leclerc. So in a matter of 2 laps, Leclerc was now down from first to third. So then also on lap 10, then we saw Lewis Hamilton come into the pits to make his pit stop, along with a lot of other people too who made their pit stops as well. But this is where we kind of saw the first round of pit stops being made by teams.
Already on lap 10, that just shows how quickly the tires are just melting away for these
Yeah.
drivers. Lap 10 is really early, and so that was extremely unusual to see, especially out of a 51 lap race. So that definitely indicated that it would be a 2-stop race.
Yeah, and then moving on, also on that same lap 10, we saw the yellow flag being waved in sectors 1 and 2 because Nick de Vries had made another mistake and he was now stranded right there. And so that caused now that would bring out an eventual safety car too, and this was when Max Verstappen had made his pit stop just on this lap, so he didn't know the safety car was gonna come out. So this was a really big turning point of this race because Verstappen pitting and then the eventual safety car coming out just as Lewis Hamilton was trying to make a move. This would mean now that Sergio Perez would be able to make a free pit stop and come out and retain his lead of the Azerbaijan Grand Prix.
Yeah, really lucky for Perez and really unfortunate for Verstappen there. And again, seeing Nick de Vries making more mistakes ever.
He broke the suspension too on his car, so
Yeah.
it's not like he just locked up. He hit his the front left tire of his car and then just couldn't turn after that.
Putting his seat at even more risk from him, and the more risk and for other drivers to come get it. He really needs to step up for the rest of the season now. Already we've seen him slouching in these first 4 races, and I hope he turns around because I feel like when he gets his form on, he's going to be a really good driver.
Yeah, definitely. But then we saw like the front runners all make their pit stops. Perez, Leclerc, Sainz, Alonso, all of these front runners made their pit stops. And so Perez was able to keep his position out in the lead as we came to the restart. It was Perez, Leclerc, Verstappen, Sainz, and then Alonso. So as they got going, Perez had a really good restart, and he was able to maintain his lead again towards turn one. And in the background, we saw the McLarens and the Haas's fighting each other, and the Alpha Tauris. But the top five still remained the same, as then we saw in the back two, Lewis Hamilton trying to make a move on Esteban Ocon, trying to make his way through after being caught up by the safety car. But immediately now, towards turn 3, Verstappen was trying to make a move on Charles Leclerc, and he did brake later, and Verstappen fought his way past so that he could try to chase after his teammate Sergio Perez. But Perez was already more than a second clear due to the fighting. So once again, Perez driving really good on a street circuit.
Yeah, and then after Verstappen overtook Leclerc, we saw Sainz trying to follow Leclerc through into turn 4, and that's where we saw Fernando Alonso get a really opportunistic move to dive up the inside of Carlos Sainz into turn 4, and he put his Aston Martin up into fourth.
That was a really good move from him. Yeah, really opportunistic.
Showing the wise old fox in Fernando Alonso, never missing an opportunity to make an overtake.
Yeah, and then so now moving on then into lap 15, the two Mercedes swapped positions after Hamilton just dived down the inside of George Russell and asserted his dominance over his young British teammate. Yeah. And so moving on, then we also saw Lance Stroll have he hit the same wall as Nick de Vries, but he got away with it this time. He didn't break any suspension on his car, so he was able to continue. But that did kick off a lot of dust. If you look at Hamilton's onboard camera behind, that did bring out a lot of dust.
Yeah, and then we saw Kevin Magnussen later trying to overtake the Alfa Romeo of Zhou Guanyu, and here Magnussen sent one to the inside of Zhou Guanyu, and then he just overcooked it on the brakes, and so he got it stopped, but he had a massive snap of oversteer on the exit trying to get the power down, and so Zhou was just able to get the switchback onto him, and Magnussen eventually would get back past him before lap 19.
Yeah, and moving on to lap 19 though, this is where we saw Lewis Hamilton putting a lot of pressure on Lance Stroll, and Stroll on the penultimate corner made a mistake, and this put him, he went onto the curb and he effectively rolled the curb, and so now Hamilton was all over his rear, and with DRS Hamilton was able to breeze past the Aston Martin and take his position up into P6.
Yeah, and then moving on to lap 32, throughout these 12 laps, Verstappen had just been trying to hunt Perez down. As we know, Perez has the new nickname King of the Streets because of how good he is on street circuits. And so Verstappen just could not find an answer for Perez's pace. And this was where, like, for the first time, we've really seen Perez actually challenging Verstappen. And Verstappen could not find an answer. He was pushing to the limits a bit more so, where at turn 15, he just overcooked it a little bit and just hit the wall slightly, but nothing too major. But he was just frustrated with being behind Perez for so long.
Yeah, so moving on to lap 33 then, we saw Pierre Gasly make a nice move on Valtteri Bottas to get himself into a whopping P18. So that just sums up Pierre Gasly's weekend for you. Just not really good at all. And then after that, we saw Max Verstappen just struggling again, or Perez actually, he was also struggling. He said he clipped the wall at turn 15, but he was luckily able to get away with it, and there was no damage, and he was able to just continue. But after that too, we saw a really nice move from Lando Norris as he got past Nico Hülkenberg right into the castle section. Hülkenberg went wide, and that compromised his exit. And Norris having the tighter entry meant he got the way better exit, and he was just able to pull alongside the Haas and dive down the inside. But after that, then that brought us to the end of the race, where Sergio Perez, his nickname is now the Street Fighter as well. He did it again on a street circuit, and Sergio Perez became the first repeat winner in Azerbaijan as he won the Azerbaijan Grand Prix.
Red Bull's fourth win at this circuit now, 2017, 2021, 22, and 23.
Yeah.
So unbelievable Red Bull's record around Azerbaijan.
Verstappen came home in second, and to complete the podium, Charles Leclerc crossed the line to get his first podium of the season. But just before I talk about anything else, I want to talk about the very last lap, where Esteban Ocon was making his pit stop, and then he came into the pit, and there was just a swarm of people right in the entry of the pit. The FIA, but I guess the FIA should just be focusing on jewelry, on why people are wearing jewelry, and not focusing on these issues.
So the backstory was Ocon had opted for a different strategy at the beginning to go long as he could, and in hopes of a safety car, because you would think safety car, Baku, obviously there would be one. And so Esteban Ocon went the whole race, and he pitted on the very last lap because if you don't pit during the race, you get disqualified.
Yeah.
So the FIA had already started setting up the post-race interviews, podiums, all that stuff, bringing out all the reporters into the pit lane while Ocon was coming in at such high speed. Baku's pit entry is a blind chicane, so the drivers won't know if anyone's there until they actually see them in front of the car. So Ocon did very well to get slowed down right before that.
Yeah,
But
I feel like that's gonna change now because of this incident. I feel like that iconic pit entry is now gonna be changed for safety reasons.
if they don't change the pit lane, they're gonna change the procedure that
yeah.
the FIA follows, because that cannot happen again. They got very lucky for no one getting hurt because of Ocon's quick thinking and also the reporters getting out of the way. But like that should never happen again,
Yeah.
and I don't think it'll ever happen again. Just once again another meltdown at the FIA.
The FIA was more concerned about the teammates, about the team, the pit crew and all them climbing on the fence rather than these people standing in the pit lane. Like really, once again, the FIA just like they're just not focused on the right things.
It's unbelievable. But anyway, going back to Perez winning, now actually becoming the first repeat winner in Azerbaijan.
Yeah.
It was another Red Bull 1-2 with Verstappen second, and now both Red Bulls would have 2 wins apiece.
Yeah.
And then Leclerc came third for his first podium of the season. That was what Ferrari and Leclerc needed, even if it couldn't be the win from pole. Then Alonso fourth with the fastest lap, so that was really good from Alonso. And then Sainz came fifth, and then Hamilton sixth, followed by Stroll seventh in the Aston Martin. So Aston Martin's doing a decent job. And then
Yeah, really good draw.
Then came George Russell eighth, then Norris ninth, and Yuki Tsunoda 10th. So another point for AlphaTauri.
That's good, yeah. But thank you guys for listening to this episode of our podcast, and be sure to join us next time as we take a look at the 2023 Miami Grand Prix. Thank you.